Welcome back to Miniature Mashup. Today we've got a craft figure tabletop that's also a Halloween prop makeover. As you can probably tell by the images on the screen, we're taking Halloween Garland, also known as Skeleton Garland, out of the box. This stuff is pretty bland, but we're going to kick it up into the realm of dark fantasy horror and turn them into undead kings. To begin, I'm going to measure my skeleton and get an idea of the dimensions of the throne we're going to create. And I'm not giving you standard measurements because the Skeleton Garland come in all kinds of different sizes. Creating a little bit of a mock-up beforehand based on the measurements you've got is a good idea. Before we get started, I'm going to apologize for my messy workplace. Sometimes when the crafting bug hits, I just turn on the camera and get going, even if my work area looks terrible.
This is my sister and brother-in-law's house. How do they live in this?
To begin, we are going to need some Skeleton Garland from the dollar store. These were $3 for $1. They're probably $2 for $1 now, or $1 a piece, because that's just the world we live in. You're going to need some jewel beads. You're going to need some tokens that are not real coins. Don't get the metal ones from Chuck E. Cheese. You're just going to need the plastic ones. Again, this is a dollar store thing. These are typically given out at birthday parties. EVA foam. One is foam insulation, and the other is going to be leftover scraps from foam egg cartons. Got a bunch of these. I always keep the lid on my foam egg carton. It's better to get the 18 pack. You get more surface area on those. The Skeleton Garland comes out of the pack looking like a display skeleton from a biology class. You're gonna have to bend it into something more suitable. Skeleton Garland's elbows and knees are designed to be bendable, so a little bit of pressure. If it does break, if you push a little too hard, or you can always just patch it up with hot glue. While I'm using a Proxxon foam cutter today, you certainly don't need one for this project. A sharp blade, a ruler, and a Sharpie will also get the job done. This Proxxon was donated to the channel by Ron over at Seawolf's Den. Thank you, Ron. The link to his channel is in the description below. Why not check out his channel and see some of his crafting too? To assemble the foam in some kind of a shape that's like a throne, I'll be using white PVA glue and also 2-part epoxy. In these early stages, while we're just sort of assembling the foam to the thickness we want, I just take my foam rectangles that I've cut with my Proxxon. I apply a liberal amount of white PVA glue. I stick it in a vise. I let that sit overnight until the arms and the back of my throne are ready to go. They're solid. I'm cleaning off any excess glue with a very cheap vinyl paintbrush. These you can get in a pack of like 20 for $1. No, I don't know about the tokens you'll be using, but these have a nice little leaf pattern around them, which I think is something to do with Caesar royalty. But there's also like a goofy anachronistic just dollar symbol in the center. I'm going to take that off with a Dremel tool. It also leaves us a nice surface for glue to adhere to, as well as a jewel bead. I'll be using E6000 and some jewel beads I'll be placing in there. These will be coming into play shortly. Sticking a nice jewel bead into the center of this token, you can see on its own this would make a pretty neat little prop of some kind. It does kind of look like a sorcerer's medallion or something. If you watch this channel, you know that I handle more plastic jewels than your average nautical surgeon. We are making 3 dead kings here, and kings need crowns, so I'm taking a lid from a plastic cup of Philadelphia cream cheese, yum yum, and I'm going to shred it up with a safety knife. And then I'm going to pick out the bits I like best to make crowns for our little skeletal kings. Working on getting some kind of symmetry. These pieces are already pretty crazy, and the idea will be to bring it back to something that looks a little more intentional. And so I'm just sort of lining them up in a patterned way that will hopefully look good when it's all put together. I'd attach the head from our Skeleton Garland to make it just a little bit easier to work with. The eyes don't have real sockets in them, and they're pretty transparently not eye sockets, so I'm just gonna go in there with my Dremel tool on this one and pop a couple of real eyes in there. Then I'll use an X-Acto knife to clean up the holes. This is the only context in which you'd want to clean your holes with an X-Acto knife. I've got all my pieces for my throne assembled here, so let's just do a little dry fit and see how this thing slaps together. I'll be putting the throne together using white PVA glue, but in order to get it to hold together while the PVA glue cures, I'm going to use some wooden toothpicks. I'm just going to stick them in and clip off the excess with my little wire cutters. That looks pretty good. Now our token and jewel bead combo is quite a bit heavier than EVA foam, so in order to affix that to our phone thrones, we're going to use some 2-part epoxy. This is a JB Weld knockoff I happen to have buckets of. Just mixing it up with a toothpick, and I'm going to slap that on there. I'm doing my best to center my token and to make sure that the leaf pattern is straight. I'm going to let all of this cure overnight before we move on to our next part. Let's start building our crowns for our little undead king. I'm going to circle the crown of the skull with some E6000, and I'm going to start putting our bits of shredded Philly cheese cream lid on in a pattern. Like, again, we're going for symmetry here, trying to make this look like an actual crown that was built, even though we're using some pretty crazy components. I'm just assembling this by hand, but if you've got a pair of tweezers and big fat sausage fingers like myself, you might want to go that route. My throne is put together with the PVA glue. It's held overnight. Just in case, I'm going to reinforce some of the seams with my 2-part epoxy. It's a lot stronger. Just applying that with a toothpick. In order to get these skeletons to have a convincing sit, I'm going to have to pull the legs out of the hip socket. Actually clip it out with my little wire cutters. Now, if you've watched this channel for any length of time, you know I'm a big collector of scrap plastic. So in addition to our bits of shredded Philly cheese cream lid, I'm also putting little bits of electronics here and there, just to differentiate the 3 skeletons from one another, give them a little bit of like leftover cybernetics, or at least prosthetics. I shouldn't say cybernetics, this stuff doesn't seem particularly high-tech, although that possibility is open. But one of the least convincing parts of these skeleton garlands is the hands, so I'm happy to jazz them up in any way possible. I reattach the legs and the head to the body using hot glue. And once we've figured out how we want to situate the arm in relation to the arm rests, we do the same with the shoulder. So it turns out hot glue works pretty good on EVA foam and plastic as well. I wouldn't use a ton of this on EVA foam, as you might melt it to the point where the project begins to lose its shape, so just don't go crazy. But for getting these arms down on this throne, it's pretty good. The hands and the feet on these skeleton garland really are the weakest point, and so I'm going to try to correct the toes on the feet. If you look down at your own foot, you'll notice your pinky toe is a lot smaller than your big toe, and just based on the anatomy of the skeleton garland, one of his ancestors had an affair with Donald Duck, because these feet are made to aid in the pursuit of a big mouth bass. I'm no master sculptor, but if we're going to elevate this thing, let's do everything we can. Now, the smart way to do this would have been to clip these toes before I started assembling anything, but now I have to be extra delicate because I don't want to break my freshly glued leg off of this throne and start over. I've replaced one hand with like a tri-prong. The other hand I'm putting this jewel in, another type of jewel bead. I'm shredding up a paper towel here. I'm going to get it wet, saturate it with white PVA glue, and then drape it over our skeleton in order to make sort of mummy wraps or the remains of old clothing. This is an effect I've used before, and it really makes it look like something that was alive and not dead. Again, the skeleton garland, as it comes to you, is sort of a skeleton you'd see in a doctor's office, very clean bones, and we want to get away from that look, and one of the ways to do that is with scraps of old clothing and moss and dirt and mold. All kinds of stuff we're going to add with paint and, again, with this paper towel with a little bit of glue in it. The way I infuse these paper towels with glue is I get them wet, I drape them across my hand, and then I rub the glue into them. I'm going to jam one piece up into the ribs, I'm going to drape another one over the arms. You want to go for randomness. Too much of a pattern makes it look intentional, and it's not how things rot. When that's finished, I put a little white PVA glue on the seat and where the feet are going to rest on the base, and then I throw a little craft sand on top of that. This is just to give it a little texture, make it look like mold and rot and dirt. Now that we've finished one, we know that the project concept is sound. We're going to do this again 2 more times, a little bit faster, with wire cutters and hot glue. Let's break down these skeletons, slap them back together, and get them into their thrones, which we've already completed. Now, I don't know if it's possible to make these 3 skeleton garland look like they're not from the same mold, but I'm going to try my best by giving them different crowns, different poses, and different armor. I'll also drape the scraps of rotting cloth, aka paper towel soaked in glue, on them differently. Some of the bits of armor you're seeing here are different jewel beads and also leftovers from Zoid's toys, as well as some of our bits of scrap plastic that we cut for this video. If you're enjoying this video of me taking 3 skeleton Garland and turning them into 3 undead kings, maybe you'll enjoy this video of me taking 3 skeleton Garland and turning them into bone demons. Putting the link up here and also down in the description. If you like this channel, please consider subscribing, please smash that like button and hit the bell in case you want to catch future videos. Lots of ways you can support this channel financially. Why not check out my eBay store where I'm selling graphic novels, miniatures, game books, all kinds of geeky stuff. Always changing it out, always bringing something new. Support my GoFundMe, the link for that's in the description below. I've got a lot of illnesses, you'd really be helping me out. And of course you can join my Patreon. If you'd like to see pictures of this project or projects we've done in the past, why not head over to our Facebook page? We've got a really nice community over there. Normally with a project like this, I'd start off with a spray primer of some kind, but because we're using EVA foam, acetone in the primer, we'll melt this plastic. We're not going to do that. We'll start by brushing on a nice thick layer of black primer. Don't make it super thick, but you want some coverage. You don't want to have to keep going over this either, and this isn't particularly detailed. I'm just using some very cheap acrylic paint from Walmart. It's about 60 cents a bottle. This black is going to be our undershadow, so you're going to want to get in all the crevices and in all the surfaces light wouldn't be hitting normally. I didn't get this in one coat. I had to go over and do it again, and the second time through I added quite a bit of purple as well, just give it some cool shades. I found that purple and blue have a little bit of a necromantic color to them. They sort of imply there's something mystical going on. Once you've got your skeleton king fully primed in black, you're going to want to start dry brushing some gray on there. You could go in a different direction, maybe with gray or brown, but we're dealing with dirt and decay and you want to sort of keep it in that range. I like gray. Just going to take the first guy to completion again, sort of as a test run for the other two, and all I did was pick out the face with a little bit of a white, bring out some highlights with lighter gray and white. Went over the rotting cloth with some green ink and used a nice blue on that gem he's holding. Let me break down and show you what I did to make him look this way. I'm going to continue to add depth by bringing up more highlights using lighter grays and eventually white on the raised surfaces. I then bring out the bits of rotting cloth using an alcohol-based ink. I absolutely love these alcohol-based inks. I picked up a set of them for, I don't know, 17 bucks, but it's worth every penny. I always like to add the shadows first before the highlights, so I'll put some of that brown ink into the face cavities, around the eyes and the mouth, the nose, sort of represent rot, maybe some leftover bits of meat or mold that are in there. And then I'll take some white paint and start bringing out highlights on the face.
Down nose, center, forehead, apple of the cheek, do a highlight of the chin.
For the armor and the crown, we're going to bring those back to black, and then bring that back to our starting point. I want the crowns and the armor to look corroded and old, so for this I'm going to use the Games Workshop technical paint, Typhus Corrosion. It's got a real gritty texture. You want to use a cheap brush that's kind of beat up for this. It does destroy good brushes. I don't use a lot of the Games Workshop technical stuff, but this one works a charm. Plenty of use for it for projects like this. I'll be putting on 2 layers. Put on the first one, let it dry, then I apply the second, let that dry, then we'll go back in and brush some bronze, dry brush some bronze over it. That Typhus Corrosion really gives it some texture, really makes it pop. And I want to have a little bit of moss on the stone, a little bit of a mossy buildup, so on the top of the throne itself I'm adding a little white PVA glue and just some green flock. Now I'm just doing a little bit of edge highlighting using the side of my brush on the thrones themselves just to make those corners pop. Let's take a look at our skeleton project through its various stages of transformation, and then let's take a look at the finished project. Well, this was a lot of fun to make, and I hope you had fun watching me make it. I thank you for tuning in, hope you'll come and catch us again, and a special thanks to all my supporters without whom this channel wouldn't be possible. I'll leave you with some spooky music and some spooky images. See you soon.